Hunter's chilling encounter in the Great Dismal Swamp, Virginia, left him shaken for life.
This was about 23 years ago, and I had no clue what a Dogman was, and I didn't believe in anything supernatural back then. I was hunting wild hogs in one of the southernmost areas of the Great Dismal Swamp. This is far south of the wildlife refuge, where it ends at the Albemarle Sound in eastern North Carolina. I had put my boat in the water at a friend's house, about a half hour by water from where I went into the swamp. This was in late November, so it was pretty cold and really overcast, and it gets dark around 5 or so. It was about noon when I tied up and got out of the boat. The first hour or so was pretty uneventful. I was working my way inland. Some of this part of the swamp can be walked through when the tide is low, and it's just marshy with deeper canals and bogs scattered about. There aren't any trails or marked paths or anything, so you really have to pay attention to where you're going, and definitely need a compass since you can't see the sun. It's pretty dark in there, even on bright and sunny days. I was back in there about 2 hours and looking for signs of hogs. I could tell some had been back there at some point, but it had been a while. I got a little further in and started smelling what I thought was a boar. It's rutting season, and male wild hogs have a very distinct smell. It's a musky and kind of fermented smell mixed with old poop and urine. It's kind of hard to explain if you've never smelled it before. However, this was different. It was musky, but more like an outside dog that's soaking wet. I stopped to look and listen, and after 10 or so minutes, I started hearing a snuffling, breathing that came and went. After a bit, I started to hear some growling. I started to get a little freaked out because it didn't sound like a hog, and it sounded big. I stopped again, knelt down, and waited while looking around. Where I was, the brush was pretty thick, so I really couldn't see more than 20 or so feet in any direction. That's when I started seeing movement. It definitely wasn't moving like a hog. It was kinda low, walking crouched down, but not on all fours. I was only getting glimpses of it, and it would stop. It was probably about 40 feet away. This is when I actually started getting scared. I was born in northeastern Kentucky and spent most of my free time as a kid in the woods, camping, riding dirt bikes, and always felt comfortable even in deep woods. When I moved to North Carolina, I fell in love with the swamp. This is the first time I think I had ever felt real and actual fear. I had a Mossberg 590 shotgun, full of 3-inch double-aught buckshot, but no extra shells and no pistol. The 590 also has a bayonet lug, so I took out the bayonet and put it on. I started backing up, not taking my eyes off where I had last seen whatever it was. A few minutes later, I heard it again a little further over to my left. I'm probably about 3/4 of a mile into the swamp, which doesn't seem very far, but the terrain doesn't make for quick movement. This went on for about another 20 minutes while backtracking out as fast as I could. I was still hearing it and catching glimpses of movement, and the smell was getting stronger. After a bit, I realized that this thing had gotten between me and the way I came in from my boat. I started to panic. I tried to get further away from it and head in the right direction. Then I saw it again, and it was standing up and pretty damn tall. It was still back in the brush, so I couldn't really make out any details as it was dark as hell back there. I wanted to cry and run, but I knew that was a bad idea. It didn't seem like it wanted to get in the water, so I started wading through the canal, headed back towards my boat. I started to put some distance between it and myself, so I got back on hard ground to move a little faster. I could still hear it snuffling and growling and moving through the brush, but it wasn't close anymore. I made it back to my boat soaking wet and freezing, but I thank God I made it out of there just in time, as it was getting foggy and starting to drizzle. I had never been that scared in my life. I made it back to my buddy's house and told him what happened. I could tell he knew something when I told him where I went. He brought me in and gave me some hot coffee, with a big slug of bourbon in it. When I calmed down, he took me to the other house out back of his property, to where his granddad lived. I'd met his granddad before, but he had always been kinda standoffish to me. I found out later he just had real bad PTSD from Korea. My buddy and his family had lived in that area since after the Civil War. I think his granddad's great-granddad had been a slave around there, but that's a story for another day. His family had history in that area and knew the place a lot better than me. After I told his granddad what happened, he stood up, looked me in the eye and said, "Don't go back in there. You're lucky you made it out. That's where the big dogs live." I left and went home and slept for about 18 hours. I tried to forget about that experience and started to believe I was just seeing things and freaked myself out. I eventually forgot all about it until a few years ago, when a Dogman encounters video came up in my YouTube feed. I was curious what the hell a Dogman was, so I started listening to it. That whole experience came flooding back to mind. It was very similar to what happened to me. I started looking into it, and there have been other sightings and encounters in eastern North Carolina. So that's my story. I'm 44 now and still live in coastal North Carolina, but haven't been back anywhere close to that area. I still hunt and love the outdoors and the swamp, but don't go too far in anymore.